Raiser, and thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to everyone today. Um, Hello, greetings, whatever time of day it is in the world where you are. I'm the chair of the um, International Centre for Responsible Tourism Global, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today for our lecture on rebalancing tourism and addressing over-tourism. And as I say, thank you, Raiser and the Institute of Tourism for giving us this platform. Earlier this year, the writer Lakshmi Sharath said, "Tourism is a gift and a responsibility. When done right, it uplifts communities, but unchecked, it erodes identity, overwhelms infrastructure, and turns living, breathing cities into theme parks." We're a non-profit which supports change makers to address these issues and to make tourism more sustainable, to uplift those communities and make tourism better places to live in and visit. So may I introduce our founder and emeritus professor, Harold Goodwin, who's going to give us a short lecture and will answer any questions you may have. And as Raiser says, please keep yourself muted while we're talking, but include questions in the chat. Harold has been described as the founder of the responsible tourism movement. He drafted the 2002 Cape Town Declaration on Responsible Tourism and wrote the Responsible Tourism Charter of 2022. As the managing director of the Responsible Tourism Partnership, he's worked on 4 continents with local communities, their governments, and the inbound and outbound tourism industry. Harold.
I think, Debbie, that explains why I'm so tired these days. Um, a couple of things I'd like to say before the lecture. The first is that it's really great to see some people on the call from Iran, and delighted that you're with us. And I hope the future improves for you. I've just had a flash come through from Travel Tomorrow telling me that in Cyprus, almost 3/4 of the tourist accommodation is operating without a proper license. And the growth of unlicensed tourism accommodation has been a massive contributor to the mushrooming of over-tourism. And the other piece of hot news on this agenda is that in April last year, I was in South Africa. So in April of 2025, I was in South Africa being told that I shouldn't use the word over-tourism because they were embarrassed and they didn't have an over-tourism problem. The managing director of the tourism marketing organization there just yesterday was published talking about the over-tourism crisis in Cape Town. I think despite the fact the issue of over-tourism has been around for a while, there is a sudden realization that we really do have to get a grip of this. I got a lot of very nice comments on my lecture last time. But a number of people said I hadn't told them everything they needed to know about responsible tourism. Well, that's not going to happen in a 30-minute lecture. Over-tourism is even worse. The big problem about over-tourism is the complexity of dealing with it. It's one of the most complex problems any city can grapple with. And as I'll say in the lecture, it requires a whole of government approach. The tourism body on its own cannot possibly deal with the challenge of over-tourism, which makes it a particularly complicated and difficult issue to deal with. But I look forward to your questions at the end. They're the bit of this that I enjoy most. Debbie, over to you.
Thank you. I will just share the screen, and if you will bear with me a second while I share the lecture slide. There we are.
Thank you for making time to listen to this presentation about the problem of rebalancing tourism. Something I prefer to call coping with over-tourism, but people don't like that word being applied to their destinations. So the ICRT Global presents really a series of ways in which you can seek to rebalance tourism to the benefit of the destination, and in fairness also to the benefit of those tourists who are wanting to visit the destination. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to present this as part of the Institute of Tourism. I would say I got some very favourable comments from my last presentation done for the Institute. A few people felt that they hadn't got as much information as they would have liked. I present as much as I can in the 30 to 40 minutes available for this presentation, but really, particularly with this subject, the depth which is required to manage overtourism is not going to be communicated in one PowerPoint lecture. The problem starts here, that we take our holidays in their homes. That's a campaign that Tourism Concern ran for many years. You can see it here repeated on the beach at Barceloneta, reminding people that this beach is part of their recreational space, it's part of their neighbourhood, as well as being a tourist attraction. When I was working in Slovenia in 1997, a Swedish NGO had fly posted around the city in Ljubljana that your everyday life is someone else's adventure. And when we travel, we need to travel with respect for the fact that we are visiting other people's homes. So overtourism is what happens when tourism is not managed sustainably. We've had years of people going on and on about sustainable tourism, but not doing anything to achieve it. Overtourism is effectively the consequence of irresponsibility, the failure to take responsibility. It's a consequence of not having placed sufficient priority on sustainability. And it's also a consequence of running up against the limits to growth in a finite world. Unfortunately, we look out at the ocean and we think our world is infinite, but it isn't. It's far from infinite, and we're more and more coming up against the limits of capacity in what is essentially a finite planet upon which we live. So way back in 2017, I defined overtourism as describing destinations where hosts or guests, locals or visitors, feel that there are too many visitors and that the quality of life in the area or the quality of the experiences deteriorated unacceptably. That can happen at the same time, or it can happen at different times for hosts and guests. It depends, of course, upon a personal assessment of the place. Some people will feel it's over-touristed long before than others, but the reality is that it's a feeling about the place. It's people's understanding of the place as it now is. The other thing to say is that overtourism is complex. Careful analysis is required if there's to be any chance of success in managing it. There are multiple different causes of overtourism and many different potential solutions. And I would argue that in any particular destination, it's often necessary to use a range of different solutions and apply them. Essentially, overtourism is a consequence of the tragedy of the commons, which occurs when individuals, by seeking to maximize their own individual benefit, damage the collective resource, the destination, by exceeding the carrying capacity of that resource. I don't think we're seeing the end of tourism, but we probably are seeing the end of tourism as we knew it. Major change is clearly afoot across many parts of the world. Overtourism is not just a problem in Europe. Every continent now has examples of overtourism that it's struggling to manage. Overtourism was also an ancient problem. Aristotle, long before the current era, wrote, "What is common to the greatest number has the least care bestowed upon it. Everyone thinks chiefly of their own, hardly at all of the common interest." Gordon, in 1954, made the point that the fish in the sea are valueless to the fishermen because there's no assurance they'll be there for tomorrow if they're left behind today. So this desire that so many of us have to grab what we can of these wonderful experiences means that we don't pay much attention to the common interest of protecting the common good, the global commons. So there's a free rider problem. The problem is that if we can't exclude people from benefiting from a collective good, once produced, there's little incentive to contribute voluntarily to the preservation or the production of that good. Now, St. Mark's Square in Venice is a good example of this. It exists. People want to go there and get their trophy photograph. In the end, the only way you can actually defend that space is by putting a gate on it. But the whole point about the square is that it's a public space. And this is the problem of the free riders, and the failure to be able to exclude. And Ostrom, who's written a lot about the problem of common property resources, makes the point that whenever one person cannot be excluded from the benefits that others provide, each person is motivated not to contribute to the joint effort, but to free ride on the efforts of others. And to a large extent, the travel and tourism industry is always free riding on the public goods, the museums, the public squares, the architecture, the history, the culture of the places that they visit. Here are some photographs of Overtourism, but that Wizz Air advertisement there, which I actually picked up at an airport, in truth, some time ago now, but nonetheless, it was picked up, I think, at Stansted Airport. Wizz Air advertising 4 great cities there as great places to go for cheap beer. It's an extraordinary way, really, of exploiting other people's cities to suggest that you go visit to get cheap beer. Cricketer Holidays placed an advertisement in Gardens Illustrated a while ago. It only ran the once. Fortunately, I saw it. Cricketer Holidays made the point, appealing to their market. Whenever a place gets spoiled, we move on. And I think destinations need to be mindful of that. They're not necessarily going to be popular forever if they become ruined by too many tourists. I took the photograph at the bottom about Barcelona. Good for the tourists, bad for the neighbours. Now, that photograph was taken in Barcelona. It's a reference, I think, to cancer. And I've been made unpopular in the past, but I'm going to say it again, that tourism is a bit like cancer, partly in the effects it has on the destination and the fact that once it's established, it tends to grow. But rather more, the point I wanted to make is that, like cancer, we begin to make progress in dealing with the problem of over-tourism when we realise that it has multiple different causes. It's not one problem, it's a group of problems which manifest in specific ways in different destinations with different sets of causes in each of those destinations. And careful analysis is critical to being able to manage over-tourism. Is it really as bad as it looks in this photograph? Well, I would argue it probably is. Must be very weird to be swimming in the pool like that in Iceland, having people coming to take photographs of you because they're there to see the hot springs. Weird. Now, clearly that's been done with the camera lens, but nonetheless, that the kind of imposing presence of the tourists over your street is undeniably disconcerting, certainly odd. Does anyone enjoy that? That's the Ramblers at maximum capacity. Is it possible to enjoy that? I'm not sure. Football crowds, I think, do enjoy being together. People will enjoy being on a crowded beach, perhaps, if they're looking for that kind of experience. But most of us, most of the time, are not looking for that sort of experience. And what happens when the sacred and the profound crash into each other? This is a temple, and you've got people here, and I haven't shown the particular photograph, but I took a photograph here of a young woman accompanying her father, who's clearly at death's door, around this temple, and the tourists taking photographs of it. That's a problem. This is somebody else's home. They are using this place as a sacred place. The tourists are there just to get their photographs. Here's another example, this one from Seoul in South Korea. And here the problem is that the tourists don't have anything to do first thing in the morning. The tourist operators, wanting to fill the itineraries of their tourists, take people into residential areas which have still got the traditional kampong structures very early in the morning. The noise, litter, loss of privacy, crowding are now causing property prices in that part of Seoul to fall. People don't want to live there. The visitors and the tour companies are basically free riding on other people's homes and living space. We begin to see, of course, many demonstrations against over-tourism. The view there in the bottom right is perhaps an extreme one, but it's a more and more common view that tourists are simply a problem. There, Sir Colin Marshall of British Airways at the Travel Tomorrow Awards said in 1994 something which I think is profoundly true, but which most academics don't quote. It's the launch of the awards for good quality travel and tourism, but he admitted that the tourism and travel industry is essentially the renting out for short-term lets of other people's environments. The problem, of course, is those rents are taken by the travel and tourism industry. When somebody stays at a hotel in London and goes to visit the British Museum, which is free, people didn't come to London to stay at the particular hotel. They came to London to visit the British Museum or go to Trafalgar Square or picnic in St James's Park. But the revenue being earned by the tourism industry is effectively being picked up by the hotels, the tour operators, the guides, but certainly not by the people who provide the facilities at the British Museum, St James's Park, or keep Trafalgar Square clean. That's paid for by the residents of London. It's their home. So this essentially is the problem. How do we deal with what is becoming a bigger and bigger problem for the travel and tourism industry because of its impact on other people's homes? Ludlow is one example. My wife and I go regularly to the Ludlow Food and Drink Festival. They're part of the Sit Slow movement. They put out this brilliant leaflet about visiting London. You'll be treated as a temporary resident. But of course, if you're treated as a temporary resident, you should expect to behave as a temporary resident, and I would argue expect to make a contribution to the costs of maintaining Ludlow the way it is, which is what more and more destinations are doing by introducing visitor fees and so on. So what we're talking about is using tourism to make better places for people to live in. That's at the very heart of responsible tourism. And the reality is that you can use tourism to achieve sustainable development. The aspiration of responsible tourism is to use tourism rather than to be used by it. And I found that a very effective question to ask politicians. Do you want the destination that you represent, the people who you represent, do you want them to be used by tourism? Or do you want your place, your constituency to use tourism rather than be used by it? And this saying, which you hear quite a lot in Asia, I think makes the point very well. Tourism is like a fire. You can use it to cook your food, or it can burn your house down. You have to manage it. Now, the antonym of responsible tourism is irresponsible, and that has two primary meanings. It can mean it's unreliable, untrustworthy, and nobody is likely to be held to account, either mentally or financially, for what has happened. And that's very often the case, what has been until recently, very often the case in cities, that nobody is held to account for the over-tourism. Increasingly, the demonstrators are beginning to hold people to account, but that's a newish phenomenon. The second meaning, of course, is a lack of responsibility, akin to carefreeness as the trait of being without worry or responsibility. And clearly, one of the complicating factors for managing over-tourism is that people do behave differently when they're away from home. There is a sense of license to behave more freely, perhaps to drink more, perhaps to be noisier, perhaps to abuse public space more than you might do in your own hometown, when you might be held to account by your neighbours and fellow residents. That is less likely to happen to you if you're abroad. As early as 2009, residents in the Rebalancing district of Barcelona sent over 500 Christmas cards to the city officials with candid photographs of the prostitutes, drug dealers and tourists using the streets as a toilet and having sex in public, demanding we want a dignified district. The problem in Barcelona is not new. So what we're looking at here is a classic example of what the political scientists called the tragedy of the commons. Public realm goods like public squares, museums, if they're not gated and paid for, the living daily life of the streets, the everyday life, are free rideable. People can come along. You can't exclude people, but nowhere has infinite capacity. And of course, the behavior of the tourists also affects the capacity. If the tourists are noisy, clearly earning more than you are, cluttering up your local restaurants so you can't get a booking, then that behavior makes it even more unacceptable. Hardin, who is most famous for writing in layman's terms about the tragedy of the commons in a paper in Science in 1968, put it this way: therein is the tragedy. Each man is locked into a system that compels him to increase his herd without limit in a world that is limited. That's what we are doing as tour operators and as tourists, is making it easier for people to visit the hotspots of the world, Venice, Barcelona, and so on. And the consequence of this, ruin, is the destination to which all men rush, each pursuing his own best interest in a society that believes in the freedom of the commons. Who is to say that I shouldn't be allowed to go to Barcelona or Venice? Nobody's really able to do that. And perhaps it's a good thing that they aren't. But the consequence of that is that Barcelona is left with a problem about how it manages over-tourism. Now, here's some images from the city of Barcelona using essentially using the internet to track where people are and the photographs that they're taking. And you can see the concentration of where people are focused. Now, people talk a lot about spatial and temporal distribution, but one of the problems of that, we talk about a lot in the course, is if you encourage people to go to places where the tourism is not managed, you're in a sense increasing the scale of the area which you now need to manage for tourism. In national park terms, people often talk about there being sacrifice zones, parts of the park which you know are going to be wrecked by over-tourism, but you permit it to happen in order to protect the other areas of the national park. And it may be that that kind of thinking is relevant for how we manage tourism in cities. It's one of the issues we often discuss in the course. Barcelona's strategic tourism plan for 2020 had 10 different aspects to it. I don't want to go through them now. You can come back to this. It'll be available online. Take a look at the list. But it gives you a sense of the complexity of the different ways that Barcelona has been using, and it's using more now, to manage tourism across the city. Effectively, what they've discovered is that it needs a whole of government approach. The destination, after all, is peopled, and the people are represented by elected politicians through the administrative structures of the city government. Promotion and management are best separated. So they've separated it in Barcelona between the marketing agency and the city, and they perform different functions. The one managing tourism, the other promoting Barcelona as a tourism destination. Now they work together, but they work as separated institutions. But the big thing to recognise is that every department of government has some capacity to assist in managing tourism. So they've set up cross-government committees. Too few places have recognised that the tourism department, the tourism bit of local government, is not in a position to manage tourism. It needs a whole of government approach at the local level. Again, something that comes up a lot in the course. So what's happening effectively is that private space is being colonised. These are the homes of people. So the quote on the left, which is from The Guardian, talking about the Balearics, Ibiza in particular here, it's totally broken down. Tourism surge forcing Ibiza's workers to live in car parks. Imagine what that feels like if you're a person working in the hospitality industry. A piece here from Reality Plus. Spaniards blame over-tourism for housing crisis. For many locals, the situation is devastating, with short-term rentals worsening and investor demand drying up house prices. And then the New York Times. Bans, fees, taxes, can anything stop over-tourism? And they have in that article, and I've given you the reference, a whole list of the places which are introducing bans, fees and taxes to try and reduce the over-tourism. It's a big debate about what you would have to charge to reduce the number of people wanting to get into the central island of Venice, for example. They clearly have not reached that point yet in what they're charging. So over-tourism is complex. It's really important to hold on to this. Accurate diagnosis of the causes, it's plural, essential, and then you have to deal with each of the causes. Now, this is made more complicated since the rise of the internet, because what we've got here is a problem both of supply and demand. Now, I'll give you just two examples of this. The demand to go to a place is often influenced by what is called in internet terms influencers, who often take selfies of themselves in extraordinary places with an extraordinary landscape or view behind them. The consequence of that is that large numbers of people then try to replicate those photographs. Some of them actually quite dangerous in terms of where they've been taken, but that's driving demand. Now, this is marketing not being done by the city or the official marketing agency or by the national government, but being done on the internet by influencers. That can really dramatically increase the number of people going to specific places within the city or the national park. And then on the supply side, you've got increasing numbers of people who are wanting to, perhaps for the sake of their pension or wanting to move there when they retire, buying up properties in destinations around the world, and then because of the easy opportunity to market these short-term rentals over the internet, moving into supplying accommodation. Now, this is a massive change because before the internet, cities could control the number of tourists staying overnight by controlling the number of hotels which were built through the planning system. And they could shape people's image of the destination through their own marketing efforts, determining to a large degree where tourists would want to go. They've lost that now. It now has to be shared with the influencers and the short-term rental websites. It's a massive change in how governments can manage these challenges. So it requires a whole of government approach. And essentially, you need to test different methods for their efficacy and their delivery. And you see that very much in the evolution of policy in Barcelona, which I've written about in my 2019 publication. And I'm about to do another one, updating it to the contemporary situation, the current situation in Barcelona. Communities are diverse. Different groups and demographics have different impacts and raise different issues. Tourists are diverse. You can market to attract particular segments and discourage others. And DMOs are going from marketing to management. They're beginning to be challenged to think about who it is that they're attracting and how in the marketing process they can manage some of the impacts of tourism. This is immensely complicated. There's far too much to go into in one short lecture like this. So, our professional certificate in responsible tourism and rebalancing tourism in situations of over-tourism has its first part deals with what is the over-tourism problem, and it was identified nearly 20 years ago as a problem. Since then, many destinations have begun to experience the problem and obviously then to begin to manage it. The other side of this, of course, is the realization, you hear this a lot in central Venice, that without a living community, the destination becomes a museum. There's an open question about whether people want to live in museums. The second unit concentrates on analysing the causes of the unbalanced tourism in particular destinations. Talks about the common pool resources, the tragedy of the commons. Are tourist traps positive or negative? Maybe it's a good idea to concentrate the tourists in a few places. Is price the best way of restricting numbers? There are no easy answers to these questions. There's no simple solution to over-tourism. Unit 3 talks about what the industry can do. What can tourism businesses in the destinations and the tour operators in the source markets, what can they do to make a difference to the way tourists interact in the destination. And social anthropology becomes highly relevant here as we attempt to move from tourists and residents to hosts and guests, trying to change the relationship between the two groups, the tourists and the people whose homes the tourists are visiting. The fourth unit looks at the ways in which local government can manage over-tourism, and I do think the primary responsibility lies here with local government, but it's not their responsibility alone. The problem here is to work out what mechanisms the local government has that it can use, and looking at those management interventions and considering which have worked in what circumstances is a significant proportion of the total course. And then the last part asks you, if you've taken the course, how you can apply what you've learned, having looked at a whole series of real efforts which have been made to mitigate over-tourism and consider how successful different management approaches have been. The course is designed for change makers. It's 2 hours of reading a week, and for completion you just need to do a short report up to about 4 pages on completion. But some of the best reports have been 2 sides of A4, talking with a kind of structured plan for what somebody's planning to do to make a contribution to reducing the problems of over-tourism. Some of my publications there on rebalancing tourism. If you've got the time or the inclination, those are freely available, and you can link to them from my publications page. Thank you for listening. It's been a great privilege again to deliver this lecture for the Institute of Tourism. I apologise again for not giving you all the answers to what can be done, but it really is something that needs to be studied properly. It's not something you can get in a 20-minute lecture on YouTube or anywhere else. But thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Harold. It's now time for our question sessions. So we've had a couple of questions already in the chat, which I'll go to first. If you would like to ask a question, if you could put your hand up, or use the little icons to wave your hands, and then I can see who wants to ask a question. And Reza, did you want to say anything about the certification before we go on to this section?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, sure. I shared the link for filling for the certificate. So please fill in. Otherwise, we will not issue you a certificate. So if you are in the live Zoom and you have got the link in the chat box, please fill it in and we will get it. And in 2 days, you will get your certificate. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll go first to the questions that are in the chat. The first one's a difficult one, Harold, to get you started. Given the diversity of factors of destinations, and this is from forgive me, I can't pronounce your surname, Lagonde Chase. Given the diversity of factors in destinations, how do you establish the threshold of over-tourism?
Oh dear, carrying capacity. I chose not to talk about that in the lecture because it's mostly bullshit. Oh, sorry, it's mostly not, doesn't work very well. Carrying capacity started with grazing animals. Now, if you put a herd of sheep onto a certain amount of grass, if you've got too many sheep on there, the sheep will die because they won't be able to get enough nutrients to stay alive. It's a nice, simple system. Works really well. The other place that carrying capacity works really well is on tube trains and aeroplanes and ordinary trains, because you can work out how many seats there are, and you can obviously increase the carrying capacity in Japan by employing people to push people onto the tube train so that you can increase the capacity. But there is a maximum capacity that you can put onto these things. Cities, national parks, not like that. There is no ultimate threshold. It's really a question of what you're prepared to put up with. So if you are looking at carrying capacity methodologies, the best one to look at is the limits of acceptable change. But each time I've been involved, I did, for example, I did the tourism plan for Puerto Princesa Subterranean River National Park when it was becoming a UNESCO World Heritage Site. and we agreed a maximum number of people. And normally you set that figure about 2 or 3 years expected growth so that nobody's upset. And of course, as soon as you get towards that figure, they redo the analysis and the number goes up again. So it's not an effective mechanism. I'm sorry, but carrying capacity is rarely useful actually in terms of managing over tourism. Cities used to have a degree of control over maximum capacity if you controlled the number of hotels, but you still couldn't control the day trippers coming in by rail. So I'm afraid there is no simple answer there. Sorry.
I'm going to move to Michael, who's got his hand up before I finish going back to the questions on the chat. So Michael Yin, would you like to unmute?
Yes, I think first of all, thank you so much for the presentation, especially on YouTube. Yeah, it's very helpful. I think this is a very important topic, especially around ecotourism, because but I think the problem is, I think I checked the chat, the cost of the program. And also, may I know what is the progress made in terms of like reaching out to like what you mentioned, a very good example, Japan and other Southeast Asian countries, because I think the issue with over tourism, especially when it comes to certification, is that there's a lot of certifications out there. But it's more of how are you, have you worked with any of the tourist associations in the other countries to kind of like, and how many people already got certified through your program? And what's the outcome right now after they got the certification? Have they performed better in terms of addressing over tourism because of what they have learned through your program? Yeah.
That's a very interesting question and difficult to determine. What I would say is that the places we've had the most success are in those places where the local authorities have managed to align themselves with national government. Because what local authorities can do turns very much on what powers they've been given in national legislation. So one of the places that's had the most success, arguably the place that's had the most success, is Dubrovnik. Because in Dubrovnik, unusually, the mayor controls the berthing of the cruise ships. So the mayor can determine how many cruise ships come in, how long they stay, and to a large extent can manage the flow around the city. So one of the things they've done in Dubrovnik is move the tables off the restaurant tables off the sidewalks to make it easier for people to move around. So they've been very successful because they've been able to deploy a range of management methods. Barcelona, which arguably has one of the biggest problems, has been brilliantly successful, but each time it's successful, more tourists arrive. And they are changing their strategy now to not seek to attract more tourists. They're trying to change the kind of tourists that they attract. But I'm afraid that the truth is there are no simple answers, and there are no there's nothing I could say to you can do which will immediately be effective. It's a matter of managing each of the negative impacts in the best way that you can, and cumulatively beginning to get control of the problem. Venice, by contrast, has tried to do it by gating, effectively by trying to put a gate on the main attraction. But of course, politically in Venice, the difficulty is that the ancient city is the main tourist attraction, but Venice is part of the ancient part of Venice is part of a much broader destination, and that all the people who work in the broader destination with people staying in the hotels and so on are reliant on the main attraction, which is the old city of Venice. So politically, that's a very difficult situation to control.
Thank you, Harold. A broader question next from someone who's new to the industry, or as a student and future tourism professional. What practical actions can we take to help address over-tourism even before we start working in the industry? And this is from Nikadek Manayesh.
Can we just find out where she is? I'm assuming it's female, may be wrong.
Would you like to unmute yourself? I can't see you on the screen, I'm afraid.
Well, let me try with the generic answer. I mean, the difficulty is I've been trying to make clear through the lecture is that generic answers to these questions don't exist. The answers are nearly always very specific, and you can learn from other places and try them. Barcelona is the biggest laboratory we have because they've tried virtually every technique there is. And I'm quite excited to be beginning to write the next installment of the post 2019 work that they've done, because they have had some considerable successes in that period. But they would certainly say that they've by no means solved the problem. I think the difficulty, if you're not yet in the industry, is really to begin to raise the issue, presumably as a resident in wherever it is that you are, and to start to ask the questions about how many tourists you want, what kind of tourists you want, and to begin to engage in the if you like, in the civic life of the place where you live. I mean, I live in a very small town of 22,000 people. We have as much tourism probably as we want, but it's mostly people coming in small family groups or coming to visit friends and relatives. We get the occasional coach party, but they're coming normally because they're particularly interested in the historic centre of the town. But one of the things that Faversham doesn't have is a coach park, which means that it's not a particularly attractive place for people to put on coach tours to. Plus the fact that we're only 10 miles from Canterbury, and Canterbury, luckily, is a full-day tour for people from London. So we don't suffer from some of the pressure that places where they're adjacent to somewhere that's a half-day tour are under, as the tour operators try and find somewhere to go on the way back. We don't have that problem. So it's what I mean. It's always specific to the particular place. There are no generic answers. But if you're concerned about it in the place where you live, start to engage with the local authorities and to discuss the problem with other parts of civic society.
There's a comment in the chat which agrees with this. Dale Honnock said, arguably the best solutions are on a case-by-case, tailored for specific destinations, depending on what the issues are that drive it. So well said, Dale. A broader question, and please feel free to put your hand up as well as put them in the chat, from Banu Thomas. How can we reduce the impact of emerging trends in tourism, like digital nomadism and hitchhiking? I'm not sure where that's specific, that adversely affect sustainable tourism.
Yeah, I'm not sure that digital nomadism always negatively impacts. I think digital nomadism is a really interesting possibility, in the sense that depending on how it's managed, you could argue that it's one of the more sustainable forms of tourism. You can clearly control it actually remarkably easily through visa regulations and internet availability, because without good internet availability and extended visas, people are not going to do it. So if you stick on the 30-day visa routine, that's not going to, probably that won't attract many digital nomads. It will attract some, but not very many. The problem is that digital nomadism may well encourage long-term Airbnb, short-term letting, which is probably a negative impact. But again, I come back to saying it's a complicated thing to manage, and that circumstances, the legal principle that circumstances affect cases, certainly applies to the whole issue of responsibility around particular forms of tourism. But digital nomadism may be one of the less difficult ones to manage, because you can manage it through the visa system.
Thank you. I'll take one from the chat and then I'll take Emmanuel, whose hand is up. So from Farid Syed from Indonesia, what sustainable tourism policies have been most effective in managing over-tourism in major European and Asian destinations? I think is looking for examples of effective policies.
Read my 2019 paper on managing over-tourism in Barcelona, and wait with excitement for my next paper, which will be on the subsequent period. Barcelona has been more successful than most. The reason I write about Barcelona is partly that their work on over-tourism was kicked off by the Responsible Tourism Conference we ran there, I think in 2019 2009, no, 2013. So I've had an inside track in Barcelona. Finding out what's going on in other destinations is not easy, but you can follow it. I'm about to start a big online database of examples internationally, but there are hundreds, possibly thousands now, of initiatives which have been taken. But there's a massive research effort required to find things that will work in your place. What I think is the case, and it's certainly been the experience of Barcelona, is that effectively you need to come up with new methods and experiment with them and see if they work. And Barcelona has been a great laboratory for this. Been a lot of learning from Barcelona about how to do it. So if you said where are the most successful places, I'd point probably to, as I've already said, I said it in the lecture, to Dubrovnik, where there happens to be a lot of suitable national legislation, which has made the situation in Dubrovnik easier to manage. And Barcelona, because it's been substantially an area of experimentation and it's been written up, although much of the writing up is in Catalan, which means you need to use a translation service as well to be able to read their documents. But there's a massive amount of literature on what's been done in Barcelona. Other places have not been so much written about.
Thank you, Harold. Over to Emmanuel Frimpong. If you can unmute.
Okay, thank you so much, Debbie. Great to see you again. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever you are located at this point. Prof, my question is very simple. Would you say that over tourism, all these challenges that some countries or destinations are having is as a result of basic selfishness? Selfishness on the part of politicians and selfishness on the part of locals who have over the years taken advantage of tourists and now they are having to face the problem of being selfish. Would you want to say that it's more of selfishness on the part of politicians and the local communities?
I try not to use the word selfish because I want to be invited to work in places. What I would say is that for a lot of countries, with the emergence of affordable aviation post the Second World War, and it kicked off, don't forget, with a lot of redundant aircraft which were available after the Second World War. You begin to see the growth, particularly of Southern European destinations, really post Second World War. And governments saw that as a great way of earning foreign exchange. And foreign exchange earnings are obviously extremely attractive to any national government. That's a priority for everything that they want to do, is to earn the foreign exchange. So national governments are traditionally much more interested in foreign arrivals than they are in dealing with the problems of overtourism. The problems of overtourism, after all, occur at the local level. The benefit of the foreign exchange is taken at the national level through the national exchequer. It's also obviously true that if you're allowed to do it, owning an Airbnb becomes a very attractive way of making a long-term investment, because the chances are that that property will increase in value given what we know about the property market, and in the meantime you've got rental coming in and be a very lucrative additional source of income. Perfectly rational. But the reason that people can do that is because it's unregulated. And the problem with the short-term rentals is that the tourism department does not control short-term rentals. Now, what then happens is that some destinations have so many short-term rentals that when you try to take action against them, you end up with legal challenges in the courts for taking away people's property rights, which is what's happened in a number of destinations where efforts to regulate short-term rentals have been overturned in the courts. It's complicated because the legal, the legislative frameworks around short-term rentals and the property market are not controlled by the tourism department. They're controlled by a whole other bureaucracy. And what Barcelona has done very effectively is to get those bureaucracies to work together, and in consequence have had more success. But as you probably know, the mayor of Barcelona is committed to not renew tourism licenses for short-term rentals after 2028. I hope he can do that. But I think there will be legal challenges within the European Union's legislative framework, and it's not at all certain, I think, that he will be able to do that. So a part of it is a question of what legislation is there, which Emmanuel means that it's much better if you deal with these things before you've got a problem than try and deal with it when there are people with an interest in maintaining property rights that they've already gained and don't want to give them up.
That leads nicely on to the next question, actually, from Ngondashe Makwendi. Although the solution is context-specific, how do you balance the conflicting interests of stakeholders of the destination?
I can give a very brief answer. With very great difficulty. Look, there is no. I could give you one answer to this, which I'm not sure is the total answer, if I'm honest. If you look at the places which have been most successful in managing over-tourism, Dubrovnik, Barcelona, and Kerala, which we've not talked about. Now, Kerala is interesting because in Kerala, we ran a responsible tourism conference there in 2008. It's the only conference I've ever run where there was actually a demonstration against the conference taking place. It was a march on the conference, which is a bit of an odd thing to happen. We thought we were making tourism better. The local communities just thought we were another lot of people trying to undermine their control of their own villages. But what happened as a result of the 2008 conference in Kerala was that they decided that they would have 4 experiments in 4 different villages to see if they could get a grip of managing tourism and dealing with over-tourism. Rupesh Kumar was able to do that in Kumarakoram. Is one of the villages. It was so successful. It was the only initiative that was successful. The other 3, for various reasons, failed. That then became, over a process of time, with much evidence being required by the minister, but it's now become the state official policy is responsible tourism, and it's worked. I would argue that Kerala is probably the most effective place at having managed the impact of over-tourism, and tourism continues to grow there because it's well dispersed across the whole state, and because local communities organized through the village panchayat have a big role in managing it. So I would argue that democratic control is a critical part of it. In Barcelona, certainly, in Kerala, very definitely, and also in Dubrovnik. So in the end, the answer to your question is it's through the local democratic processes.
And again, this leads on to our next question from Sejana Nepali. All countries have world-renowned destinations, while many equally beautiful regions remain under-visited. What strategies would you recommend to better distribute visitors across the country in the way you've just described for Kerala?
I wouldn't. I think it's all very well. You see, everybody says, well, we'll just develop somewhere else. So, Barcelona tried this. They tried to distribute the tourism more to other parts of Catalonia, and quite rightly so. But that isn't every new tourist who goes to Barcelona is still going to want, even if they go somewhere else in Catalonia, they're almost certainly going to get on a train and go into Barcelona because they want to see the Sagrada Familia. It isn't going to solve the problem in Barcelona by spreading it to other places, because those people are still going to want to see the honeypot attractions. And that is a really difficult part of the problem. And I would argue strongly against encouraging people to go to places unless you know that you can manage the number of tourists that are going to arrive there. It's a big, big challenge if you start spreading it.
And one final question, I think, before we finish. And this one is from Kimo Bukamba from Japan. And it's a question about your quote, Harold, from the lecture where you gave the quote from Aristotle to emphasize how ancient the issue is. His question is, was that in the sense of tourism, or was it making an allusion to perhaps any form of large gathering?
Oh, I don't think it's either, actually. I think it comes back to the point that Emmanuel was making about the selfishness of human beings. I mean, I'm going to finish with a story, okay? So this will make me really unpopular. I used to tour lead before the wall came down. So the last time I was in Prague was in 1988, year before the wall came down. And I used to take a Christmas escape committee. It was people like me who didn't have much of a family Christmas, so we'd escape somewhere to go for Christmas. And we used to go to Prague. And Prague was a great place to go because you could enjoy the city. All the workers were having their break, and you could actually meet with Czech citizens. In 1988, there were so many Americans there, we hardly met any Czech citizens. So I stopped organising a Christmas escape committee tour to Prague, because already in 88, before the wall came down, the experience of being in that city over Christmas was that it was predominantly populated by Americans. And as much as I like Americans, there's very little point in going to Prague if you don't want to meet some Czech citizens. So we stopped doing it. And that's one of the issues, is what is the quality of the experience. The BBC did a series of interviews on the Ramblers, asking tourists about their experience of being on the Rambla. And quite a lot of people said, well, I've been here for a week or so, but I haven't met anybody from Barcelona. I just keep meeting people from Australia or New Zealand or England or whatever. And that's not why I came. And I think that is a really big issue once the number of tourists is squeezing out the local population. Now, to be clear, there's been a big effort in Barcelona over the last 4 or 5 years to bring local people back to the Rambla, but they still have a problem with the number of tourists who want to visit it, because it's regarded as an iconic place. And the wonderful food market that exists on the Rambla had become, I think they're trying to, again, turn it back, but it had become a place where tourists went for tasters of interesting local food. But meant the local community lost their local market because the tourists were more lucrative than the local community was. I'm sorry that it's so complicated, but the more I learn about over-tourism, the more complicated I realize that it is. I do not think there are any simple solutions to it.
But it's worth understanding all of those issues, and definitely we always recommend destinations survey residents, not just potential visitors, spend all their money on looking at the inbound market and understand their own destination. We have come to the end of our hour-long session today. Everything will be recorded and it will be shared by Razor. And would you like to say anything else, Razor, to conclude?
No, it was great. Thank you so much. I just see an old friend, Sonia, that he had got something from Harold. Sonia, are you here? You want to say something before we close?
Hello. Hi, Harold. I don't know.
Sonia?
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, hello.
Harold, maybe you do not remember me. I had another name like 18 years ago, and I'm based in Madagascar, but I'm still based in Madagascar. I just have another name. And you were on the judge on the panel of the World Travel Market Responsible Tourism Award that I got in 2008. This
Good
sounds
heavens,
so
that's a while ago.
Yeah, it's a while again, 18 years, right? And well, that was for my small tour operator company based in Madagascar. It was a great achievement. But if I'm thinking back about what we did 18 years ago, I mean, like pioneers in ecotourism, we were talking more about ecotourism, and responsible tourism was the new, very, remember, very fancy concept. And you were, it was with Justin, what was
Justin
his name again?
Francis, yeah.
Yes, Justin Francis and Amanda Wills. So we have all white hair now, but I just wanted to tell you that Madagascar has still no over-tourism and still no tourism. So we're doing well, kind of. So sometimes you are self-protected from over-tourism by, if you're on an island having no planes coming or very little airplanes and very little infrastructure and a little bit of political instability, then there is no over-tourism forever.
I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And there are, as you say, there are plenty of places which have not yet suffered from over-tourism. And what I would say is that being really careful about how you open up a destination for tourism is a critical part of avoiding over-tourism. Once you've got it, It's a bit like once you've got cancer, you've got to deal with it. If
Exactly.
you haven't got it, you can avoid getting it to a degree.
Yeah.
And not allowing the airport to expand is probably one of the most important ways of doing that, although it has other costs which the community pays for by not allowing the expansion of the airport. After all, when Ryanair decided they weren't going to take as many planes to to Brussels, because they didn't like the airport taxes, that did Brussels quite a big favour in terms of reducing the number of tourists. So that's a great way of controlling it. Debbie, I
Well,
think we
nice
do need
meeting
to
you
end it.
again.
We
Thanks,
do.
Sonia.
Harold, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
bye. Yeah.
So any other questions? Anybody want to ask something, add something? Did anybody met Harold 50 years ago? Before
There's a
we
number of
could get
names here.
to
Dale
18
Honecker, I
years, but
remember. Birgit, I remember. There's a number of people here I remember. It's really nice. And Diana as well. It's nice to have you listening to me still.
Can I ask one question? Sorry.
yes, please.
I am from Mongolia, and I just hear the discussion with this lady from where she came from, like talking about less tourists, etc.
Madagascar, yeah.
Yeah, Madagascar. But I'm disagree with her understanding about our tourism. Please correct me, Harold, about mine. Mongolia is also very much a nomadic country without so many number of the tourists. But when we see the problems, syndromes, when you describe about over tourism, it is not only related with quantity of the tourism, very much from the supply side, governance, managerial, and especially in terms of the local, actual based specific solutions. So it's not, for me, not really only when you have already crowded by the tourists. Over tourism is much more complex, broader, which includes prerequisite infrastructural managerial concept. This is my understanding. Thank you.
No, I think that's right. And I think one of the things you need to really protect in Mongolia is the notion that if you want to visit a nomadic country, and look, you obviously do have settled populations in cities, and that's not dissimilar from other places. But in terms of the nomadic experience, I think you do need to put your foot down and ensure that tourists who are coming to visit a nomadic culture experience that nomadic culture, because that's why they've come. And I do think that facilitating that kind of engagement would be an important part of it. And we do have experiences, really good experiences with Village Ways, for example, in India, where they have managed to incorporate Western visitors into village life through the way in which they've organized the tourism. And it's basically by walking on foot, not trekking, but walking on foot at a relaxed pace through the countryside from village to village. And the nomadic experience could certainly be attractive. If I was younger, I'd really like to come out to Mongolia and do one of those nomadic packages. But unfortunately, I think I'm a little old for that now. Debbie, I think we do need to call a halt there.
We do. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Reza. I believe the certificate link is in the chat for people who want to confirm they've attended today, and that
Thank
you're
you.
sending out the links.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you,
so much.
everybody.
Lovely to-
So please get in touch with us if you need anything. Recording from tomorrow will be on our website, as always. Also, the last one from Harold is on the website already. You can watch that one as well. Thank you so much, and see you soon. And don't forget our next event on this Thursday with Professor Wolfgang, Chinese Tourist Welcome Awards. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
Thank
Have a
you.
nice
Thank
summer.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
Harold.
you
Thank you,
for.
Debbie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
See you on Thursday.
Oh, hello.
Oh, Professor Wolfgang, are you here?
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
of course. Of course. Listening to Harold.
Harold, are you here?
I think he
He's
may.
gone.
I think
Oh.
he may
Bye.
have gone. Yeah.
Bye.
He left.
He did his work, yes. was funny to see that. So I know Sonia and also I know Ghana from Mongolia. So all friends everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you,
Yeah, that's
Reza.
funny. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. See you on Thursday.
Yes, and
Thank you.
congratulations.
Bye.
You had 100 participants fully booked. I think a lot of people in the
Well,
stream as
in
well.
Zoom, but we had on different platform. We had few people actually. Yeah, it's good.
So very good. Okay. Have a nice
Thank
day,
you.
everybody. Greetings from
Thank
Kathmandu.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.